Southwest Airlines is finally abandoning open seating. How does our sense of humor change as we get older? France's left-wing party just won their election and they want to tax the wealthy at 90%. Can you guess what the best performing stock of all time is? And what happens when you give people $1,000 a month for free? That's all coming up on episode 138 of the Financial Pathway Podcast.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us on the Financial Pathway Podcast with Nate Skelly, where we discuss important financial questions and give you practical advice to guide you on your financial journey. If you enjoy the podcast, consider subscribing and leaving us a review. You can also follow the Financial Pathway page on Facebook for more helpful financial tips and videos.
Okay, we're going to start today with talking about Southwest Airlines. It's been a long time since I flew on Southwest. One of the big reasons that I don't fly on Southwest is that they have open seating, but that is all about to change. Very, very surprising. Southwest made an announcement that they're moving away from open seating and will go to assigned seating here in the near future. And really it comes down to just running the numbers and the revenue for the airline. They found that they probably will be able to earn more business and also have higher profit margins if they go to the assigned seating model. If you know anything about Southwest, if you've flown in Southwest, you know the open seating, you don't pick your seats ahead of time. You just have your group, and then they board by group. And so first ones in get their pick. And then, if you're towards the back of the line, you're having to choose a middle seat somewhere. And for me, I don't like that at all. So I've flown Delta pretty consistently here for the last few years, and I've had a good experience with Delta. Southwest has very good customer reviews, especially for the airline industry. They seem to have very high satisfaction ratings. It'll be interesting to see if this change affects any of that. But part of what really caused them to reevaluate and decide to reverse course, because they've been doing this for 50 years now. They've really held out for a long time when all the other airlines have gone the other way. In their own internal research, they found that 80% of their own customers and 86% of potential customers preferred the assigned seating. So, and airlines like Delta, they're able to upcharge for first class, for premium economy seating, for Comfort Plus, those types of things. And so I think Southwest just sort of sees the handwriting on the wall and has decided to throw in the towel and make that change. So I was very surprised to see that. The next article that I wanted to point out for this month comes from Stat Significant, talking about how our humor changes over time. Very interesting relationship that we have with human beings with humor. It's such an important part of the human experience, how we relate and appreciate humor. But how does that change over time? Well, first of all, we know that you start to develop a sense of humor pretty early on, at only about a few months old. So I've got a new niece and a new nephew who are only a few weeks apart, Athalia, who we just got to visit in Australia. And it's really cool just seeing her in that early stage at just a few months old. She's starting to smile a lot and react to different stimuli and appreciate. She's amused by things. And then we just got back from Australia and got to see Callum, who lives 15 minutes away from us. But just in the few weeks that we were gone, you see how much that changes. Early on for babies, how quickly their maturing process is. And now he's smiling and even laughing a little bit. And it's just really cool to see how that builds. But of course, as a baby, and then as a toddler, and then as a young kid, the things that you find funny or the things that you're able to find humor in changes rapidly, because it starts with things like nonsense words or just silly sounds, but then kind of playing around social rules and realizing, oh, okay, it's kind of funny if I'm not supposed to do this thing, but if I do it anyway, or tricks like things that, just simple tricks or puns. And it kind of moves up in complexity and nuance and the things that we're able to understand and appreciate, and sarcasm. But what I found interesting is that, of course, as a kid, the things that you find funny are not usually the same things that you find funny as an adult. With me having young kids and the movies that they like to watch, and a lot of animated movies, it's interesting to me because the creators of those shows realize that they have to develop the humor at two different levels. They're very purposely creating humor that's going to relate to kids, because that's going to be the main audience of who's going to watch these movies. But they also understand that parents are going to be watching the movies too, and they want to appeal to them as well. And so a lot of times the silly and slapstick and very obvious humor is the stuff that lands with kids, but it's the more subtle and, wink wink type of humor, relatable humor that lands with adults. And it's interesting how animators are able to work at both of those levels. What happens though, and part of the research that they talked about in this article, was our appreciation for humor, or at least our likelihood to really laugh freely and openly, diminishes over time as adults. As kids laugh openly and freely basically every day. Once you reach about college age, it was about 85% of college age adults reported having laughed openly and freely yesterday. But then that trend line just goes down, down, down over time. The older you get, the less likely you are to have laughed in the last day. And it drops down to about 60% by the time you're 80, which that seems very depressing. You're like, oh man, so I just guess the older I get, the more burdened with life and the more serious things get and the less I appreciate humor. But then an amazing thing happens. Around the age of 80, the trend line reverses and it shoots back up. And so, and I don't know all of, I'm sure there's many people that can speak to this a lot more eloquently than I can, but I've always felt like the older you get, and once you get into your twilight years, the more you start to revert back to a childlike sense in a lot of things. Seems like that also includes your humor. And we all know older people, who just have a great sense of humor, and the older they get, the more they just seem to like to laugh and joke and just enjoy things. And so I guess it's a little bit of a silver lining that maybe things are, you don't smile or laugh as much as you maybe did 5 or 10 years ago, but apparently the older we get, the more likely that is to turn around. But also just even our appreciation for different types of humor. You think about the things that I find funny as a young adult and a parent of young kids is very different than what I would have found funny 10 or 15 years ago. I think about some of the things that people joked about, or the jokes that I laughed at 15 years ago. I'm like, that's not funny. Just how time and I guess maybe maturing, but just your experience with life, how that changes the things that you find funny. The things that my kids find funny is very different than what I find funny now, but it's also very different than the things that my parents might find funny, or my grandparents. But it's also not just time, and that's the amazing thing to me about humor is certainly our sense of humor and the types of things that we laugh at or find funny change over time, but also culturally, humor really changes. Like, go back and look at shows like The Three Stooges, or Laurel and Hardy, or comedians on the Ed Sullivan Show. Like, look at things from 60, 70, 80 years ago. A lot of that stuff does hold up, and you can watch some of that stuff and still laugh at it now, but a lot of things just don't carry over. And things that people would have found uproariously funny 80 years ago, we look at today and go, eh. But similarly, the things that we find so funny to us today, probably a couple generations in the future, they'll look back at and similarly say, yeah, what was so funny about that? So it's interesting how our ability to find humor and laugh and smile at things adapts and evolves over generations, but also over time and culture. Okay, shifting gears quite a bit, let's go over to politics. We're in the midst of an election season here in America. We're just about 4 months away from the November election, so we're going to hear nothing but politics and American politics. However, I don't know if you're aware, we had some pretty interesting election results here recently over in Europe, in the UK and in France, particularly is what I wanted to talk about. Surprisingly, the left-wing French political party did very, very well in the recent elections. France has had a very tumultuous time these last few years. If you'll remember last year, there were a lot of riots and upheaval. There was a proposed change. France, with their economically and with their their government spending, they're in a little bit of a crisis mode right now. Last year, there was a proposal to move back the retirement age for retirement pension, similar to how we have a Social Security program. They have a similar pension type of system in France. Previously, the retirement age was 62, at which you would receive your pension. They've moved that back. The proposal was to move it back to 64, 2 years, which, by the way, in the U.S., our full retirement age for Social Security is 67, used to be 65. So they were proposing moving it from 62 to 64, and that led to massive riots and a lot of unrest in France. So it was not a very popular proposal with a lot of people. But of course, the reason they were making that change is because they recognized that their government spending was not sustainable and they were not going to be able to deliver on paying a pension to everybody at 62, especially as people are living longer and more years in retirement. Well, kind of in response to all of that, it seems that there's been a massive shift kind of to the left wing, and the New Popular Front party, the left-wing party, did very, very well. The centrist party came in second, and then the right-wing party came in third. You have to keep in mind, with American politics, it's hard for us to relate a lot of times to other democracies and how they work in their system because we're so dominated by a two-party system. In most other countries, especially in Europe, there's multiple parties. There's usually 2, 3, 4, 5 that are the main parties, but within their parliament, their Congress, within their lawmaking house, you might have 7, 8, 9, 10 different parties represented because there's a lot more parties that actually have a feasible a chance to win seats in their parliamentary house. But the interesting thing is, okay, so this left-wing party, the New Popular Front, did the best, but they did not get more than 50%. So what happens in situations like that where you have multiple parties but nobody can get 50%, then they have to form coalitions. So they strike deals with other political parties to get a majority in that lawmaking body, and then they can start to implement their policies. Well, the policies that the New Popular Front are proposing, some of them are pretty radical. At least from an American perspective, it would seem that way. So because they are a left-wing party, some of these things would not be very surprising. They are proposing to raise the minimum wage. They want to set price controls for things like food, electricity, gas. They want to lower the retirement age not to 62, but actually down to 60. But the biggest and the most shocking one is that they are proposing a new 90% tax on annual income above 400,000 euro, which right now the dollar to euro is almost a 1-to-1. So can you imagine a 90% tax on income above $400,000? That's a pretty radical proposal. Now, it's not clear yet whether or not they'll be able to get this done because, again, they don't have a majority. They'll have to form a coalition. Will they get enough votes even within their own coalition to be able to implement a change like this? But that's a really radical proposal, and I was shocked to see that. Like, that seems like something that's a very fringe. Like, we would expect that to be from some political party that, like the Democrat Socialist Party, that nobody even knows and nobody even votes for here in America. Like, sure, yeah, that's what they think, but they have no chance. This is the most popular party that got the most votes in the French election. So we'll see what happens with that. I'm certainly going to keep my eye out on that. Not surprisingly, there's going to be a lot of pushback and already has been on that proposal, not least of which is that many of France's high-income, wealthy people are already weighing their options and saying, well, what do we do about this? Are there workarounds? Including, do we just move out of the country? Do we go to Switzerland, to some other European country to avoid this very, very high tax? So interesting, to say the least. A lot more I could say on that, but I found that a very interesting article that I wanted to share. Moving on to the next one. This is very interesting. What's the best performing stock of all time? It's a great question. Up until now, I don't know that I would have been able to know where would be the right source to find that information other than just trying to do a Google search. Here's a great article from Meb Faber, and he lists the best performing stocks of all time. If you want to take a second and guess what you think it is, you may want to just pause the episode here real quick. What do you think is the best performing stock of all time? You might have thought Apple or Amazon or Microsoft or Warren Buffett's Berkshire. All of those are good guesses, and all of those have done phenomenally well, but they are not even close to being the best returning stock of all time. The total percentage gain of this stock is, get this, over 265 million% from where it started to where it is today. And it is, drum roll please, Altria. You say, what is Altria? They are a tobacco company that's been in existence for a long time. They've been publicly traded for almost 100 years now, and they have an over 265 million% return over that time frame. Now, the top five: Altria, Vulcan Materials, Kansas City Southern, General Dynamics, and Boeing. Boeing's probably the one of those five that most people are like, oh, okay, I know Boeing. Of the top 20, here are some popular names that round out the top 20: Coca-Cola, Pepsi, John Deere, Hershey, Johnson & Johnson, CVS, And there's a lot of names in there that most people would not be familiar with. IBM is in there. Why aren't Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, these companies, why aren't they the highest? Really what it comes down to is every single one of these top 20 companies has something in common, and that is they've been around for a very, very long time. Some of them going back to 1925 for their long-term return history. So think about that. 100 years of compound interest, that's what's really taking them over the top. The other thing that I found fascinating is that the average return of the top stocks, Altria, the best performing, their average annual return has been only about 16%, 16.28%. Now that's very, very good, but that's not like probably the number that people would think. Like they would think, oh, the best performing stock of all time probably has like a 50% a year return or 80%. No, it's 16.28%, which is very good. But if you do that over and over and over again for 100 years, that turns out to be a very, very big number. And the reason that the Apples and Amazons and Microsofts are not there yet is they've had a very good return, but they have just not had nearly as many years to compound. So maybe in the future they'll catch up to some of these companies. But it just goes to show and it underlines why long-term investing is so powerful. Compound interest over and over again, you let time do its thing, and it can turn to be, mathematically, it's really, really mind-blowing what it can do. So I found that very interesting. So there you go. Best performing stock of all time, Altria. Last article comes to us from Newsweek. Sam Altman, you may have heard that name before. He is a tech billionaire. He's been very involved in the artificial intelligence space. He has been doing a lot of work with cryptocurrency. And so he's kind of on the leading edge of some of these things that we're wrestling with as a country and trying to figure out. And he's a very smart, very brilliant guy and has some very ambitious ideas. One of them being he really has done a lot of work and research into understanding whether universal basic income can be a thing that is a useful feature going forward for America. Now, what is universal basic income? Essentially, it's this idea of what if we were to give people a baseline amount of money every month, no strings attached? If you remember back in 2020, there was a Democrat candidate, Andrew Yang, who got a lot of attention with a similar idea. He called it a freedom dividend. He never really got a lot of traction. He was never like a serious contender to win the nomination, but he definitely got a lot of attention, and especially that idea of universal basic income. Now why? Why are we thinking about universal basic income all of a sudden? Well, people like Sam Altman and Elon Musk and Andrew Yang and others have really come to the conclusion that because of artificial intelligence, because of the rapidly evolving technological innovation, it's going to replace a lot of blue-collar jobs. Things like people working in retail or restaurants or even driving. There's I think about 3 million truckers in the United States right now. So as self-driving vehicles and more automation gets put in place and artificial intelligence, so a lot of office type jobs will be replaced. What are people going to do? If the job market is shrinking and people don't have job opportunities or the skills for kind of more of those higher level type of positions that can't be replaced by AI, or at least not yet, what are people to do? So one of the solutions that's been batted around is, what about universal basic income? What about giving people a certain baseline amount of money each month and utilizing that as a way to kind of put a backstop to the changing job to the changing job market. So here's what they did. Sam Altman he backed this study. They've been running it for 3 years now, where they gave a group of people, I think it was 1,000 people, but they gave them $1,000 a month for 3 years. No strings attached. You can use it however you want. And then they also took a control group, a similar size group, but they only gave them $50 a month. And they basically just wanted to see, okay, what's the difference going to be between group A and group B? How does this $1,000 a month affect them? What are they able to do with it? And so of the findings from the research so far is, of course, people that received the $1,000 a month were able to increase their spending on food, rent, and transportation primarily. Those were the biggest areas where people increased their spending. They also were more likely to move houses, a little bit more likely to get medical care, and a good bit more likely to look for a new job. So it seems like part of the extra $1,000 a month. By the way, these were low income people that they were utilizing, that they were putting in this study. And so it gave a lot of people a measure of more agency, a little bit more options for them to be able to explore. Another thing that they found is that the group that received $1,000 a month also is likely to, not likely, but did work a little bit less than the control group. Both groups ended up working more hours overall, just based on coming through COVID and then inflation. It seems like across the board in America, there's been a shift to people taking on more employment to make more money, to make ends meet. So basically, looking through the different articles and the research, it seems like there was a minor improvement for a lot of people who were on this program. They were able to afford a little bit more, put more towards the basics, have a little bit more agency and freedom, work a little bit less, more likely to search for a new job. The problem with this, of course, is in miniature, it's hard to know exactly how this might expand to doing this on a large scale. And just like there are certainly benefits, I mean, I think it's undeniable that there were benefits for the people that received $1,000 a month. I mean, that's great. $1,000 a month is better than no extra dollars a month. But will this translate to overall being more of a benefit than a setback? And the corollary I would point out is you think about what happened with the stimulus checks during COVID. Part of the idea was, hey, people are struggling, the businesses are shut down. A way to encourage or spur economic activity is let's send stimulus checks to people, help them out in a tough time, and encourage some economic activity for people to, shop more or to inject more money into the economy. And that did work because you definitely saw people saving more, have higher saving rates, or certain industries having an injection of more orders and business. But also we saw that inflation jumped at the same time. As more money is injected into the system, that creates an inflationary environment where prices are going to rise because there's more money to spend. And so is injecting $1,000 a month for people as a universal basic income, is that actually going to be more helpful if things get more expensive at the same time, and that offsets the benefit of having extra money? But it's very interesting, and I find it a very intriguing concept, and I'd like to learn more about it. But I thought that would be interesting to share those results with you. So that's going to wrap up our articles for this month. As always, I appreciate you listening to the podcast. We've got a great series of retirement income, how to find or talking about passive retirement income. I'm going to do a series of podcasts coming out in August, so I hope you'll check those out. And as always, appreciate you listening. I'll see you on the next one.